A billionaire secretly followed his black cleaning lady and her children after work, and what he saw left him in tears. Daniel Richardson stood behind the curtain of his private office, watching through the bulletproof glass as Carmen Santos put 3 cans of food and a bottle of children's medicine into her worn bag. It was the 4th time in 2 weeks that his mansion's automated inventory system had recorded minor discrepancies, always at the same times, always associated with her access card. At 41, Daniel had built a medical technology empire worth $2.3 billion. He hadn't gotten there by ignoring details or blindly trusting people. Every penny was tracked, every employee monitored, every process optimized for maximum efficiency. And now the woman who had been cleaning his house for 8 years, the same woman who knew every room, every routine, every domestic secret, was taking things away. Carmen was 54 years old, had 3 adult children that Daniel had never bothered to meet, and possessed the uncanny ability to make the 15-bedroom mansion spotless without him even noticing her presence. She arrived at 7 a.m. sharp, left at 4:30 p.m. sharp, and for 9 hours was practically invisible. Except for the red alerts flashing on the house's control panel. At that moment, Daniel watched her fold towels with her usual military precision, as if the items in the bag were just figments of her imagination. What bothered him most was not the value. They were supplies he wouldn't even notice if they disappeared completely. It was the silent betrayal, the abuse of trust, the certainty that he was being deceived by someone he paid too well to do this kind of thing. When Carmen turned off the kitchen lights and headed for the staff exit, Daniel already had his car keys in his hand. Not the Bentley the driver drove, nor the Tesla he used for meetings. The gray Honda Civic he kept in the garage for emergencies, and that no one would associate with the CEO of Richardson Global. 20 minutes later, he was following her 3 cars back as she drove her 2008 Corolla through streets that were becoming progressively narrower and less lit. Daniel had never been to this part of town, not out of prejudice, simply because there had never been a reason to. His offices were in the financial district, his mansion in the most expensive suburb, and between the two there were only highways and neighborhoods that existed only as points on the GPS. Carmen stopped in front of an apartment building that looked like it had been built in the 1970s and forgotten there ever since. Daniel parked at the end of the street and watched her climb the external stairs to the 2nd floor, her heavy bag swinging from her shoulder. He waited 10 minutes before approaching. The building had a broken intercom and smelled of fried food mixed with cleaning products. Through the 2nd floor hallway window, he could see Carmen in a small apartment, arranging plastic plates on a folding table. Next to her, 2 children, a boy of about 10 and a younger girl, waited patiently in mismatched chairs. That's when Daniel realized she wasn't stealing food for herself. She was feeding her children with supplies stolen from his endless pantry. And something about the way the boy looked at those cans of soup as if they were treasure made his stomach churn in a way he couldn't name. But Daniel Richardson was not a man who acted on impulse. For 8 years, Carmen had had complete access to his home, personal information, routines that could be worth millions in the wrong hands. If she was capable of stealing food, what else was she capable of? And more importantly, what else did he not know about the lives of the people who worked for him? That night, as he drove back to his empty mansion, Daniel made a decision that would change everything. He would find out the whole truth about Carmen Santos, not just about the stolen items, but about who she really was when she wasn't vacuuming his Persian rugs. What he couldn't have imagined was that, by investigating the secret life of his cleaning lady, he would end up discovering something much more disturbing about himself. If this story of unexpected discoveries has piqued your curiosity, be sure to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple suspicion turned into a revelation that would shake the foundations of both their lives. The next day, Daniel arrived at the office 2 hours earlier than usual. Not because he had urgent meetings, but because he hadn't been able to sleep. The image of those 2 children looking at cans of soup as if they were birthday presents had stuck in his mind like a persistent virus. He opened Carmen's personal file in the human resources system. 8 years of work, not a single day of unexcused absence, consistently perfect evaluations. Monthly salary, $2,800. For him, that was what he spent on a single meal at some restaurants. For her, apparently, it was not enough to adequately feed her children. Daniel typed the address he had seen the night before into Google Street View. The building looked even worse in the virtual daylight. Peeling walls, rusty stairs, windows with tape replacing broken glass. He clicked on Evaluate Rents in the area, and almost choked on his coffee. Even in that dilapidated place, a 2-bedroom apartment cost $1,400 a month. A quick mental calculation. After rent, Carmen had $1,400 for food, transportation, clothes, medicine, and everything else 2 children might need. Divided by 30 days, that was less than $47 a day for 3 people to survive on. He slammed his laptop shut, as if that could erase the numbers from his head. All morning, Daniel couldn't concentrate on anything. He canceled 2 meetings and stared out the office window, watching people walking in the streets like distant ants. For the first time in years, he wondered how many of them were going home where they would have to choose between paying the electric bill or buying food. At 1:30 p.m., he made an impulsive decision. He drove to his mansion, parked across the street, and waited. Carmen arrived punctually at 2 p.m. for her afternoon shift. She worked part-time for him and probably had another job the rest of the day. He watched her enter through the staff door carrying her worn bag and a school backpack that clearly wasn't hers. Through the house's internal cameras, Daniel watched her go straight to the guest room that never received guests. She took 2 school notebooks out of her backpack and placed them on the bed, along with pencils and a small eraser. That's when he realized Carmen was using his house as a place for her children to study. While he worked, they did their homework in a room he didn't even remember existed. For 8 years, 3 people had been living parallel lives inside his property, and he had never noticed. Daniel felt something strange stir in his chest, not exactly guilt, but an uncomfortable feeling that perhaps he was the kind of boss people told bad stories about. He pressed the internal intercom. "Carmen, can you come to my office?" 5 minutes later, she appeared at the door, her hands still damp from cleaning products, a cautious expression on her face. "Is there a problem, Mr. Richardson?" Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in 8 years. Carmen had wrinkles around her eyes that he had never noticed, and her hands looked older than her 54 years. She held herself upright, but there was a subtle fatigue in her shoulders that spoke of years of carrying too much weight. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair in front of his desk. Carmen hesitated. In 8 years, she had never sat down in his presence. "Please," Daniel insisted. She sat on the edge of the chair, as if ready to run away at any moment. "Your children do their homework here." It wasn't a question, but Carmen swallowed anyway. They're quiet, Mr. Richardson. They don't get in the way, I promise. It's just that. It's just that there's no quiet place to study in the apartment where you live." Carmen blinked, surprised that he knew where she lived. "It's an old building. The walls are thin, and there's always a lot of noise." Daniel nodded slowly. "What about the food you take home?" Carmen's face drained of color. Her hands clasped in her lap, and she lowered her eyes. "I can pay you back. You can deduct it from my salary. I'm not asking for reimbursement. I'm asking about the circumstances." She looked up, confused by his neutral tone. "Why didn't you ask for help? A raise, an advance, anything?" Carmen let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "Mr. Richardson, with all due respect, men like you don't like people like me asking for more than they already get. I learned a long time ago that it's better to solve your own problems quietly." Daniel felt those words like a slap in the face. Men like me. Rich. Powerful. Accustomed to seeing people like me as furniture. Useful as long as they function properly, invisible the rest of the time. The silence in the room became thick as lead. Carmen stood up. "I'll get my things and leave. You don't need to pay me for the rest of the week." "Sit down," Daniel said firmly. "I'm not finished." She obeyed, but held her chin up with a dignity he had never noticed before. "In 8 years, you've never given me any trouble. You've never been late, never left anything undone, never complained about anything. And all that time, you were raising 2 children on a salary that barely covered the basics." Carmen didn't respond. "It makes me wonder," Daniel continued, "how many other people work for me in similar situations. How many other Carmen Santos are there in my company, in my world, that I simply never noticed?" He leaned forward. "And it makes me wonder what kind of man that makes me." Carmen studied his face for a long moment. "An ordinary man, Mr. Richardson. Most people live like this, seeing only what directly affects their lives. The difference is that you have the power to change things, if you want to." Daniel nodded slowly, something solidifying in his mind. "Carmen, I'm going to make some changes. To your salary, to company policy, to the way things work around here. You don't have to do charity for me. It's not charity. It's correction. He paused. But first, I need to fully understand the situation. Would you allow me to get to know your children properly? Perhaps have dinner with you. Carmen stared at him as if he had spoken in an alien language. You want to have dinner at my house? If you'll have me. She was silent for so long that Daniel began to wonder if he had offended her in some way. Finally, Carmen nodded once. Saturday night. But don't expect anything fancy. When she left the room, Daniel stared at the closed door, realizing he had just made the most important decision of the last few years. And what frightened him was not what he might discover about Carmen and her children, but what he would inevitably discover about himself. Each new revelation only confirmed an uncomfortable truth he wasn't ready to face. That perhaps, after so many years of accumulating wealth and power, he had completely lost the ability to see the people who sustained his world in the shadows. The following Friday, Daniel arrived at work with a determination he hadn't felt in years. During the previous night, he had made a decision that would change not only Carmen's life, but potentially the lives of hundreds of other employees. He needed information, real data, not just assumptions based on guilt. At 8 a.m. sharp, he called Rebecca Torres, his human resources director for 15 years. If anyone knew the reality of the company's employees, it was her. Rebecca, I need a complete survey. Salaries, cost of living, benefits, family situation of all support staff, cleaning, security, maintenance, kitchen. I want data, not sanitized reports. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. In 15 years, Daniel had never shown interest in the details of his employees' personal lives. Is there a specific problem? Just do it, please. And be discreet. At 11 a.m., Rebecca returned with a folder that made Daniel gulp. Of the 47 support staff, 31 earned less than $3,000 a month. 15 had second jobs. 8 lived with more than one family per apartment to share costs. 3 worked even when they were sick because they couldn't afford to miss a day of work. Daniel, Rebecca said, sitting down carefully, in 15 years, you've never asked about this. Why now? He closed the folder and stared at her. Rebecca, did you know that Carmen Santos uses our house for her children to study? That she takes food that would otherwise be thrown away to feed them? Yes, I did, Rebecca replied without hesitation. And I also know that Luis from night security sleeps in his car during the day because he shares his apartment with 2 other families. And that Maria, from the kitchen, sells her own diabetes medication to buy school supplies for her granddaughter. Daniel stared at her in shock. And you never told me? Daniel, with all due respect, when was the last time you asked about the personal life of someone who isn't an executive? Rebecca sighed. They're invisible to you. They always have been. Not out of malice, but because you live in a completely different world. Those words hit Daniel like a punch in the stomach. He was one of the most successful businessmen in the country, but he was discovering that he knew absolutely nothing about the people who made his daily success possible. I want you to organize a meeting, Daniel said, his voice firmer than ever. With all the support staff. In the main conference room. Monday at 4 p.m. Daniel, that's going to scare everyone. They'll think they're going to be fired. Then make it clear that's not the case. And Rebecca? I want you to organize a complete audit of our operating costs as well. I want to know exactly how much we spend on superfluous things versus investing in people. That Saturday, Daniel drove to Carmen's apartment with his stomach in knots from nervousness. He had faced ruthless investors and negotiated million-dollar deals, but the idea of having dinner at a simple table with 2 children made him more anxious than any business meeting. Carmen opened the door wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt, without the work uniform Daniel was used to seeing. Punctual as always, she said with a half smile. Thank you for having me. The apartment was spotlessly clean, but Daniel could see beyond the surface now. The old television with its distorted picture, the sofa with cushions strategically placed to hide tears, the folding table that served as the main piece of furniture in the room. Mr. Richardson, a child's voice greeted him. Daniel turned and saw a boy of about 10, thin but with bright, intelligent eyes. You must be David. Yes, sir. Mom said you own the house where she works. That's right. And you? I'm going to be an engineer, David, with confidence that only children possess. Like you. Actually, I'm a businessman, not an engineer. But why an engineer? Because I want to build houses that don't fall down when it rains hard. Our last house fell down. Daniel felt a tightness in his chest. When was that? Carmen appeared from the kitchen carrying a tray. 2 years ago. The building was old, and the structure collapsed during a storm. We lost almost everything. And the girl? Daniel asked, noticing the absence of the second child he had seen the first time. Sophia is at the neighbor's house doing homework with her friend. She's 10 years old and shy around strangers. Carmen placed the platter on the table. Nothing fancy, as I warned you. Chicken stew, rice and beans. During dinner, Daniel discovered details that shocked him deeply. David was top of his class at school, but he didn't have a computer to do research. He used the computers at the public library on weekends. Sophia loved to draw, but she used notebook paper because sketchpads were too expensive. Carmen worked 6 days a week. In addition to Daniel's house, she cleaned law offices 3 nights a week. Why didn't you ever ask for help? Daniel asked, genuinely confused. Carmen and David exchanged a quick glance. Mr. Richardson, Carmen said calmly, people like you help causes, not people. You donate to charities, sponsor charity events. But when it comes to looking someone right in the eye and asking, what do you need? That's rare. Daniel was silent, digesting those words. After dinner, while Carmen washed the dishes, David showed Daniel his school notebooks. They were filled with careful notes, drawings of machines, and mathematical calculations impressive for a 10-year-old. Where did you learn this? Daniel asked, pointing to a complex equation. YouTube. There are lessons on everything there. Except sometimes the internet goes down and then I have to wait. At that moment, something solidified in Daniel's mind. It wasn't pity he felt, it was outrage. Outrage at a system that allowed a brilliant child like David to have to rely on unstable internet to learn, while he spent more on wine each month than Carmen's entire family earned. When he said goodbye that night, Daniel knew exactly what he would do on Monday. Carmen, he said at the door, on Monday at 4 p.m. we will have an important meeting at the company. With all the support staff. It's not a dismissal, it's the opposite. It's a change. A big change. Carmen looked at him curiously. What kind of change? Daniel smiled, a genuine smile she had never seen before. The kind that should have happened a long time ago. In the car, on his way back to his mansion, Daniel called his personal accountant. Mike, I need you to calculate something for me. If I increase the salaries of all the company's support staff by 50%, what would be the impact on the annual budget? Let me see, it would be about $400,000 a year. Daniel almost laughed. $400,000. Less than he had spent on the watch on his wrist. What if it were a 100% increase? $800,000 a year. Do the math to implement this starting next month. And Mike? I also want to establish an educational fund. Full scholarships for employees' children who want to attend college. Do you have a budget in mind for that? Daniel thought of David explaining mathematical equations in a crumpled notebook, dreaming of building houses that wouldn't fall down. No budget limit. No child of my employee will fail to study due to lack of money. When he hung up the phone, Daniel realized he was about to do something that would not only change lives, but completely redefine who he was as a person and as a businessman. And for the first time in years, he was genuinely excited to get to work on Monday. What he didn't yet suspect was that his decision to really look at the people who supported his empire would reveal much greater secrets about inequality, dignity, and the true meaning of success, truths that would transform not only his company but his worldview forever. On Monday at 4 p.m., Daniel entered the main conference room and found 47 support staff seated in chairs that probably cost more than their weekly salaries. The nervousness was palpable. Most had never set foot on that floor, let alone sat at the table where million-dollar decisions were made. Carmen was in the third row, her hands folded in her lap, a cautious expression on her face. Next to her, Luis from night security fidgeted uncomfortably with his borrowed tie, and Maria from the kitchen looked around as if she were visiting a museum. Thank you all for coming, Daniel began, dispensing with a microphone and standing in the center of the room. I know many of you are nervous, wondering if you've done something wrong, if you're going to be fired. The answer is no. None of that. A low murmur ran through the room. In fact, I'm here to apologize. And to correct mistakes I should have corrected years ago. Daniel turned on the projector. The first slide showed a simple spreadsheet, current salaries versus the cost of living in the region. I discovered something shocking this week. I discovered that 31 of you earn less than $3,000 a month. That 15 of you have to work 2 jobs. That 8 of you share apartments with other families to be able to pay rent. And that 3 of you work while sick because you can't afford to miss a day's pay. The silence in the room was deafening. I found out that Carmen uses my house for her children to study because there is no quiet place in the apartment where they live. That Luis sleeps in his car because he shares a room with 2 other families. That Maria sells her own medicine to buy school supplies for her granddaughter. Carmen's eyes widened, realizing the extent of Daniel's research. For 8 years, Carmen worked for me with absolute perfection. Never a mistake, never a delay, never a complaint. And all that time, she was taking food that would have been thrown away to feed her children because her salary wasn't enough. Daniel's voice became firmer, more decisive. That ends today. Not because I'm a saint, but because I've discovered that I'm a hypocrite. I talk about medical technology saving lives while the people who support my life struggle to survive. He clicked to the next slide. Effective immediately, all support staff salaries will increase by 100%. We are doubling your salaries starting this week. A muffled cry echoed from the audience. Several people covered their faces with their hands. Carmen leaned forward, incredulous. Second, we have established a comprehensive educational fund. Every child or grandchild of an employee who wants to attend university will receive a full scholarship, tuition, books, housing, everything. Luis from security began to cry openly. Third, comprehensive family health insurance, including dental and psychological care, for all of you and your families. No co-payments, no waiting periods, no red tape. Maria from the kitchen stood up abruptly and left the room. Daniel paused, concerned, but Rebecca motioned for him to continue. She had gone to cry in the hallway. Fourth, an on-site daycare for employees' children. Because no one should have to choose between working and caring for their children. Daniel looked directly at Carmen. Carmen, you will head up a new department, employee welfare. Your new salary will be $8,000 per month, with a defined career path. Because someone who can raise 2 brilliant children on $2,800 per month clearly knows how to manage resources better than any MBA I've ever hired. Carmen brought her hands to her chest, her eyes welling up. But there is one condition, Daniel continued, his voice more serious. I want you to help me identify other companies, other situations where this is happening. Let's create a movement, not just an internal policy. He clicked to the final slide, a photo of David showing his math calculations. This is David, Carmen's son. He wants to be an engineer. He dreams of building houses that don't fall down when it rains. He's 10 years old and already solves equations that I couldn't. But he was studying in a crumpled notebook because his family couldn't afford proper school supplies. The room was completely silent, only discreet sobs breaking the silence. David will attend the best university in the country, with the most comprehensive scholarship I can offer. Not as charity, but as an investment in the kind of person this world needs. And the same goes for all your children. Daniel turned off the projector and walked over to Carmen. Carmen, will you agree to lead this department? Will you help me transform this company into the kind of place our children would be proud to work at? Carmen slowly stood up, tears streaming down her face. For a moment, they just looked at each other, 8 years of invisibility being repaired in a single moment. I accept, she said, her voice breaking. But on one condition. Daniel raised his eyebrow, surprised. That this isn't about guilt or charity. That it's about recognizing that we always deserve dignity, and that you're finally seeing what has always been here. Daniel nodded, extending his hand. Deal. As they shook hands, the room erupted in applause that echoed through the hallways, causing other employees to stop and wonder what was happening. Later, when the room had emptied, Carmen remained behind. Daniel was putting away his papers when she approached him. Daniel, she said, the first time she had ever called him by his first name. Why did you do that? The truth. He paused, thoughtful. Because I realized I was building an empire on the invisibility of brilliant people. And I discovered that I'd rather be remembered as the man who chose to see, not the man who chose to ignore. Carmen smiled, a smile filled with a peace Daniel had never seen before. You know, in 8 years of working for you, this is the first time I've felt like I was really working with you. That night, Daniel called David. David, it's Mr. Richardson. You said you want to be an engineer. Yes, sir. Then get ready. Because we're going to build houses together. And they're never going to fall down. On the other end of the line, he heard David shout with joy, calling his mother and sister. It was the sound of hope becoming reality, and Daniel realized he had finally found the true meaning of success. But what he didn't yet know was that this decision would create waves much bigger than his own company, inspiring a quiet revolution that would change the way thousands of invisible employees would be treated across the country. The transformation was just beginning. 6 months later, Richardson Global became a case study at Harvard. Daniel was on the cover of 3 business magazines as CEO of the Year. But what made him most proud was on his desk, a photo of David, now 11, presenting his engineering project at a science fair at the best private school in town. Carmen ran a department of 15 people, visiting companies across the country to implement labor dignity policies. Luis from security bought his first house. Maria paid for her grandson's surgery. 47 families had their lives transformed. The movement inspired 200 companies to review their salaries. Daniel received letters from employees across the country. Thank you for seeing us. You know, said Carmen as she entered the room, you didn't change the world. Daniel raised his eyebrow. You just decided to see the world that has always existed. She was right. The biggest discovery was not about inequality, it was about humanity. For years, Daniel had built his success by ignoring the people who supported him. Now he understood that true power isn't having employees, it's having partners. The sweetest revenge against social blindness isn't punishment, it's awakening. And waking up to our shared humanity is the only success that really matters. If you believe that every person deserves dignity, sign up for more stories that show how small decisions can transform entire lives.